and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio and another disembodied hands video, because today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And we're going to be taking some control knobs, some just regular plastic knobs, and having a go at relicing. Now I don't want to get into any controversial territory in this video. I know people have very strong thoughts one way or another on relicing, but the inspiration for this video was a message I got from a friend of mine who said, "You work with plastics. How would you go about aging new knobs?" Now I happen to know he's got a used guitar, a used Les Paul, it's been aged, it's had some wear and tear, and what he's looking for is to replace some of the plastic wear, specifically the knobs in this case, and he wants something that's kind of in keeping with the level of wear and tear on the guitar to begin with, rather than putting on something, brand shiny and new. Now my experience with working with plastic is for my guitar picks, where I'm actually trying to get plastic looking as pristine as possible. So this is sort of working a little bit backwards for me. But I thought it would be an interesting exercise to go through to see how we would go about relicing. So I was just going to work with some scrap plastic, but then I remembered I do actually have some, in my big box of guitar parts, I did have some knobs very similar to the ones that my friend has. These are like Gibson style, like the mirror top knobs. So what I'm going to do in this video, and this is all kind of unplanned, got a few ideas about how I might go about this, but a lot of this is going to be kind of experimenting and making things up as I go along, seeing how we can convert these fairly new shiny knobs. There's a few tiny little scratches on them from where they've been kicking around in my box of spare parts, but try to get them to look a little bit more like an old used piece of guitar like this. This is the control knob on my 1970 Les Paul Deluxe Gold Top. It's really been through the wars. It's got a few dents and scratches, and I'm kind of using this as a bit of a reference. Now relicing, I think one of the reasons it gets a bit of a bad reputation is people just see it as being like throwing a guitar around and just abusing it and beating it up. Really good relicing is about doing something that's sympathetic and thinking about, well, how does the guitar, or in this case the part of the guitar, how does it get used? Where does the wear and tear get inflicted? So looking at that knob on my Gold Top, what I'm seeing is on the top there's quite a few scratches, fairly pronounced. There's a few little chips and dings out of the rim, so I'll be looking to try and replicate that. But one thing that struck me when I was looking at it is it's not particularly scuffed up around the edges, and that kind of makes sense, because if you think about how this gets used, it's got a lot of like contact time when the volume or the tone's being turned up or down. You've got the very light friction of fingertips. It's actually going to polish it slightly. And I've noticed something similar on guitars of mine, like on the scratch plate on my Strat. There's a few places where it's quite heavily scratched, where the pick's been hitting it, it's just had general wear and tear. And there's other parts where my hand tends to rest, where it's actually quite polished. So I think what I'm going to try and do with this is scuff it down. So actually use some abrasives to take that real shine off of it, to mimic some like wear and tear, but then actually polish it back up again to sort of mimic years of wear and tear in use by fingers, so like actually polishing it up slightly. And like I said, looking at the reference picture from my Gold Top, you put some scratches into the top, maybe a few little dings out there, possibly even I might take a little bit out of the edge, just to mimic some damage that the knob might have picked up over the years. Okay, so first things first, I think I'm going to just start by sanding off with a very, very fine sandpaper all the way around the edge of the guitar, around the edge of the knob, and then do a few other little bits of like damage and like artificial wear and tear, and then try and buff it up with something to make it look like it's been just like used and fingers rubbing against it. As you can tell, I'm talking quite a lot, but I'm sort of procrastinating because I'm going to have to commit to starting to damage a guitar part. So what tools? Let me procrastinate more and talk about the tools I'm going to be using. So from my pick making toolbox, I've got all sorts of abrasive sheets, all courtesy of Halfords. These are also sandpapers, wet and dry papers, everything from 80 grit through to 2,500 grit. So I'm probably going to be going for the much finer stuff, really, just for general, taking the shine off. Maybe going for something a little bit coarser to do some deeper scratches. Also, I need things for making scratches, so I've got some files which I think might be useful for doing grooves, and just for general scratching I've got like a scalpel, like a craft knife type thing. I've got a pointy thing on a stick. Got a packet of sewing needles. They're point, so they might come in quite handy. Stanley knife, a craft knife, box cutter type thing, which could be useful. And also, this is a big glue spreader, but it might be useful as like a little mini sanding block. Okay, I've talked far too long. I need to commit to actually starting this. So the first step, I think, is to just go around and just generally sand off around the edges here. So I'm going to start off with some wet and dry paper. I'm going to go in some fairly fine, so I'm going to try 2,500 grit to start with. Right, so I'll just cut myself off a little bit of 2,500 grit. I'm just going to go in with my fingers, not using a sanding block or anything, and just basically scuff up the edges here. Now I'm guessing that because this is injection molded plastic, and part of the manufacturing process with injection molding is the mold actually has like some sort of chemical sprayed on the inside of the mold before the plastic goes in. It's basically just to help to release the piece once it's been cast. So there will probably be residue of that releasing agent on the surface of this. So sanding is partly taking that off as well as just roughing up the surface. So how well does this show up? I've got a fairly direct light onto this, so hopefully the camera's showing it up, that we've really taken the shine off that. So 2,500 grit, that is like super fine grit sandpaper. So go around, take a little bit off the top. So I'm probably going to polish bits of this up. Top I'm going to be putting some scratches in, I think, but we'll just make sure that that's scuffed up, and also around the skirt of the knob as well. So I'm looking at this by eye rather than looking at it on the camera, so apologies if I keep drifting out of trying to drift out of frame. So I'll just go through, sand that, and just go around and take the very edges off as well. So at the minute this is looking a bit more scratched and matte than I'd want it to, but like I said, we are going to polish this back up. So I think that's a decent starting point actually. What I might do now is get a slightly heavier grit sandpaper, something coarser, and put some slightly more aggressive scratches in there. Just one or two. I don't want to overdo it though. Okay, nothing too coarse for this. This is 320. I think will probably do the trick. So I'm not going to like go all over. I'm just going to put one or two little scratches. Where might this have been scratched or knocked or something over its life. So we're not going on right the way over the surface. And remember, I'm going to go through with a polish. So some of a lot of these scratches will be less obvious, but it'll be generally more polished finish with a few little gouges and whatnot in there. Again, I'll do a little bit around the top. So that's my starting point. And one thing I noticed on my Les Paul, my gold top, was there's quite a bit of damage just around the rim of the knob. So I'm going to get some very coarse sandpaper and just do a quick brush over there. So I'm thinking for this probably about 60 grit, maybe 80 grit. So I've got a little piece of 80 grit, so this is pretty coarse, but if you think about it, we're looking to emulate damage that would come from day-to-day use, and this is a pronounced edge. So coming in and out of guitar cases, just general use, things getting coming into contact with the guitar would scuff up the very rim, this slightly elevated rim around the edge of the knob. The point of the relicing process is to try and simulate where you would get in real world situations. It's not just random bashing and scratching. Okay, so I think that's a starting point. Now I want to take a few little chunks out around the edge there in random places. And I think I'm going to bring in an extra piece of kit for this because I value my fingers. I've got a little vise. So I'm going to put this into the vise to hold it so I can keep my fingers well clear, because I'm going to be going in with a knife. I think my starting point for this is going to be chipping at it with a Stanley knife, like a box cutter type knife, and then enlarging the damage with a file. I think, like I say, I'm kind of winging this and sort of making it up a little bit as I go along. So I'll just pick a random point around the edge, and I'm just going to cut into that. Yeah, it's quite a slightly brittle plastic, so it's cracking with the knife. So I'm going to take a little bit of a chunk out there. Now, obviously, this is another thing that it's going to just smooth out. The wear and tear. You can do damage to the piece, but over time, things will rub against it and gradually polish it up. So we can do this and have some fairly sharp edges, but I'm going to go through and try and soften those up a little bit, so the overall playing experience isn't going to be impaired. So having done that little scratch there, just going to go in with a triangular diamond file. Just accentuate that a little bit. Go a little bit deeper, right with the apex of the triangular file. So that's looking quite promising. So I'm just going to do that in 2 or 3 other places. Maybe different size things. Maybe some places just going to be a little nick. Need to be careful not to overdo this. So remember, you can cut. It's like pick making. You can cut material off, but once it's off, you can't put it back on again. And just as I'm doing this, it's made me realise over time the edges of this would get slightly rounded over. So I'm going to get a flat file, and I'm just going to go around the edges here, just ever so lightly round those over, just to mimic a few years worth of, sorry for the scratchy noises, mimicking years worth of just your hands, things coming into contact with the knob and wearing it down. And go back to the sandpaper. Just take the edges off there. Okay, so have a close look at that. You can see the little dings and scratches and pieces out of it. Do I want to do more, or would I be overcooking it? I think one more. I think one more. So hopefully you can see, amongst all the dust, the little dings and scratches and pieces missing from the ridge on the knob there. Now that's all been sanded with 60 grit. I want that to be fairly polished because again it's just keeps getting rubbed over time, so that will naturally polish up. So I'll need to go through the grits a bit like polishing a pick, actually, from 60 grit all the way through to say 2,500, and then give it a proper polish on the top. I'll do that later. For now, what I want to concentrate on is putting some scratches into the top. Now I've caught it a few times with the rough sandpaper, so that's a decent starting point. But looking back at the reference photo from my gold top, you can see that in use that got some deeper gouges. So there's a starting point for that. I'm going to use a scalpel, working quite carefully. Just put that in and just mimicking a scratch or two or three. Because if you look at the reference photo, not all scratches are equal. Some are deeper than others. So the most severe ones there with the scalpel. I've got this little pointy tool. Let me just soften that out. Just put some general dings and scratches in. And for some finer scratches, I'm just going to use a sewing needle. Now that part in there will get a little bit polished, but not as much as on the outside. So I'm going to go through the grits with my sandpaper to polish up the edges on around the rim, and also try and sand this down a little bit, and just to give it a bit more polish. And then we'll look at the edges of the knob again. So I'm going to start off, I'm just going to keep it in the vise. It's a little bit easier to hold. And just a little piece of, this is 600 grit. I'm going to go around the edges where I filed our little chamfer onto it. Remember, this is a part of the guitar, it's going to be getting used. So we don't want sharp edges, we want it to be usable without, you know, when you're turning the volume up or the tone up and down, you know, we don't want to be cutting fingers on sharp edges. So just a little bit of going through the grits and just gently polishing this out. Now remember, this process, it's abrasive paper, so it's actually going to probably make some of this look worse before it looks better. But those scratches that we put in, they're fairly deep, so they should still remain even once we've been through the grits and try to polish all of this up. Okay, so that was 600 grit. I'm going to go and get a piece of 1200. Generally what we're doing is we're just doubling the grade of paper that we're using, getting finer and finer. I'm just looking at how scratched it is in places, and it's more scratched and more damaged and more relic than I want it to be. I'm just telling myself, you know, trust the process. Trust the process. I'm familiar with working with plastics and polishing and using abrasives and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, don't worry too much about how it looks partway through. This should work out okay. So that was 1200 grit. Next place I'm going to go is, I'm going to go to 2000. So 2000 grit, a little bit finer. Really all this process is doing is just, it's sanding down, it's removing material, removing scratches that would be left by the previous grits of paper, and we're going through progressively finer grades of paper. Okay, now I thought that reflector was actually embedded within a thin layer of plastic, but the way that the text is coming off, I suspect it's not. I think it's a little reflective sticker that's stuck onto the top. So I'm going to have to be careful not to take too much off, because obviously you want to know what the controls are for. You want to keep the volume or tone label there. Okay, so that's 2000 grit. Now let's go for 2500. So this is the finest sandpaper that I've got available. Just basically taking it to the same level of scuffed that we've got on the edge. Okay, so quite heavily damaged around the top. It's more scratched than I want it to be, but that's okay. I was expecting it to look like that at this stage. What I'm going to do now is get something to actually polish the edges. So I'm going to get a cloth and some polish, and we'll make a start on buffing this. Apologies if the camera looks like it's moved slightly. I knocked it while I was going to get the polish. And while I was going to get the polish, I was just thinking about the edge of the knob. So obviously taking some material out of the top to kind of simulate the guitar getting a few knocks. But I'm wondering if maybe it would look good if we took a few little chips just out of the edge here. And I think that could look quite good. Kind of it would be in keeping. I have not damage like that on the controls on my gold top, but it's something that is thinking about the way guitar would be used and the life it might have. Could take some little dings out there. Now this knob isn't going to go onto a guitar. I'm just using this to experiment with. But I'm thinking if you had a guitar where there's somewhere where you turn the volume down and you kind of get the sweet spot where it just starts to clean up a little bit, it would be quite useful if you had an indicator on the side. So it serve two purposes here. We could take a little ding out of the edge of the knob like that, but it would give you something that you could feel and know where that was just by touch. That's where you want to turn your knob to, against like the little thumb bleed or things like this. If that's lined up there with the marker, that's the sweet spot. So I think I'm going to do is go back to the Stanley knife. I'm working quite carefully because I'm not mindful I'm not in the vice here. It's just take a little ding out of the edge, as if it had been chipped with something. And then get my triangular file and just open that up a little bit. And maybe another one just for purely aesthetic purposes. Maybe take a little divot out here. Maybe another one just around here, just for, again, just purely aesthetic purposes. And then just put the file in, just to open those up a little bit. So I think having done that, go through the sandpaper just to smooth everything off. Starting with 320. This is where this little piece of wood's going to come in handy, just as a little sanding block. And then go through the grits, 600, 1200, 2000, 2500. So that's the sort of the damage inflicted on it. Just for the heck of it, let's see how that compares to a pristine version. So you can see quite a difference there. But what I want to do is mimic the thing being used and just naturally polishing out some of those scratches. And I'm debating over to what to use as my abrasive polish. And this might sound controversial. I'm going to use some toothpaste. Now, I've already done a video on my channel about this, looking at the polishing process for guitar picks, because I don't like using the oil-based or heavy chemical polishes, heavily chemical-based polishes. But toothpaste is basically abrasive, mild abrasive cream. It also smells a lot nicer than working with some of the synthetic polishes. So I'm just putting some of that onto a rag, and then it's just a case of rubbing that into the surface of the knob, and that will, it's a finer, I feel like it's a finer abrasive grit than the 2000 grit sandpaper, so it'll polish it even further. But if we don't polish it for a very, very long time, some little scratches will remain, which is what we want. There's a few deeper scratches from when I went over with the 320 grit. So apologies if I keep going out of frame with this. Because look, going back to the reference picture, going back to my gold top, there's not a lot of surface scratching on the surface of the knobs. So looking at this, yeah, there's a few little scratches and dings. I'm going to give that a little bit more of a polish. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. My hands aren't getting in the way of the work too much. And now we can go around the top, around that edge where we took the chunks out. Go into the middle. I'm hoping that this doesn't take all of the text off. Danger that it will, but I don't want to over polish the inset bit there, so I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, right, I'm going to rinse that off, get rid of the toothpaste, and we'll come back and take another look. I think I like that. I was wondering if I might need to go through with an even finer polish, but I don't know if I do. I'm just trying to get this to catch the light properly so you can see it. For comparison, that's the mint condition one. So you can see the relic one it's reflecting the light, it's got a shine to it, but it's not super shiny factory fresh like this one. And a little bit of wear and tear around the base, nothing super obvious, but we have got, the light's not really catching it, but we have got little bits of material missing, so we haven't got beautiful pristine edge on it, just mimicking the way that it might have got damaged over the years. So I'm actually fairly happy for just an initial experiment in relicing. I'm reasonably happy with the way that's turned out, especially compared to what I was using as the reference photograph. I think the only thing where I might have probably goofed is thinking that reflector part was embedded in some plastic. So when I've gone in and scratched the surface, I've taken some of the text off more than I would have liked. But it is what it is. I like the way the little chunks have come out of around the rim there. That works quite nicely. Now, relicing is a bit of a contentious subject. People say it's it's stolen valor. If you've got a guitar, you should let it get wear and tear yourself through playing rather than through damaging it yourself. I disagree. A relic guitar feels very comfortable. to play. The important thing is that the relicing is done sympathetically, like to emulate natural wear and tear, thinking about how the guitar would be used in practice and where the wear and tear would come, rather than just like randomly beating the thing up. And in this case, we've got a knob, which would be the scenario here is this is going to go into an existing guitar which has got damage on it, and it would just look crazy if we put a brand spanking shining new part onto a heavily used guitar. So I think that's probably as far as we want to take it. An interesting little experiment. If maybe it's giving you a bit of food for thought for what you might want to do with parts for your own guitar, doing a bit of relicing. I'm not a relicing person. I'm a guitar teacher, I'm a plectrum maker, but this is an interesting little side project and quite fun to do. If you enjoyed the video, please click like. If you really enjoyed it, please click subscribe, all of that sort of jazz. And as ever, if there's anything you want to ask me about guitar gear, guitar playing, music theory, guitar picks, anything like that, if you go here, send me an email and I'll answer your question in a future video. You're welcome to leave a comment on the video, but I don't always see comments left on videos. YouTube's a bit rubbish about letting me know when people leave comments, so sending me an email is a better way to do it. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.